The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Weston Boyd wiped the sweat from his brow and stared down the dusty road leading to his ranch. For weeks he had clung to a single hope, the letter that promised him a mail-order bride from St. Louis, a woman who would bring companionship and maybe even a bit of salvation to his dying homestead. His cattle were dwindling, the well was barely holding, and loneliness gnawed at him worse than hunger ever could. Today was the day the stagecoach was due to arrive, and Weston's heart hammered with an uneasy mix of excitement and fear. He adjusted his vest, smoothed his rough hair, and practiced the words he meant to say when she stepped off, "Welcome home." But when the wagon rolled to a stop, dust swirling like a ghostly curtain, what stepped down wasn't the dainty, bonnet-wearing lady he had pictured. Instead, three towering women in buckskin dresses and braids leapt down, their presence commanding, their eyes sharp as hawks. For a moment Weston thought he was hallucinating from the heat. One of them, taller than him by a good head, crossed her arms, muscles rippling like coiled rope beneath sun-bronzed skin, and said in a low voice that carried authority, "You Boyd?" The question struck him like a bullet. His throat went dry. He opened his mouth but no words came. The middle sister tilted her head, studying him as though weighing his soul, while the third stood slightly apart, scanning the horizon as if danger might leap from behind the rocks. Weston finally stammered, I was expecting someone else." The tallest one narrowed her eyes. "We were told this rancher needed help. We came." Before he could process her words, the wagon driver cracked his whip and the coach rattled away, leaving a cloud of dust and three women standing in his yard like fate itself. Weston's mind spun. How could this be? Where was his promised bride? He pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket, the one with careful handwriting describing a woman named Clara Mayfield, gentle and proper. He looked at the three strangers. None of them answered to that description. Before he could speak again, the one who had questioned him walked closer, close enough that Weston had to crane his neck to meet her eyes. "I am Anika," she said, "these are my sisters, Tala and Marin. You sent for a bride. You got us." His heart lurched. Us? The word carried a strange weight. He wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but before he could the sound of distant gunfire cracked across the open plain. All four of them froze. The third sister, Marin, who had been watching the horizon, suddenly barked, "Riders coming." Weston turned, squinting into the sun. Dust plumes rose in the distance, a half-dozen horsemen racing fast, their silhouettes bristling with rifles. His blood ran cold. Bandits. They had been haunting the territory for weeks, hitting isolated ranches. Weston's place was next. Panic seized him, but Anika's massive hand gripped his arm with iron steadiness. "Get inside. Now." Her tone left no room for argument. Weston stumbled back toward his creaking porch while the sisters fanned out with startling precision, as if they had done this dance before. Tala pulled a bough from the wagon, the string taut and deadly, while Marin crouched low with a rifle she must have hidden in the supplies. Anika planted herself in the center, her sheer presence like a fortress. The riders thundered closer, whooping and firing into the air. Weston ducked behind the doorway, heart slamming, and thought with bitter irony that the bride he expected never showed, but these women who had appeared uninvited might be the only thing standing between him and death. The first outlaw raised his gun, but before he could fire, Tala's arrow whistled through the air and buried itself in his shoulder, sending him tumbling from his saddle. The chaos that followed was a blur, gunshots cracking, horses screaming, the sisters moving like shadows and fire. Weston dared to peek out, unable to believe his eyes. Anika grabbed a charging rider by the reins, yanked him clean off the horse, and slammed him into the dust. Marin's rifle cracked twice, dropping another from afar. The bandits, expecting an easy raid, suddenly found themselves facing a storm they couldn't weather. Within minutes the survivors wheeled their horses and fled, leaving bodies and dust behind. Silence fell, broken only by Weston's ragged breathing. The sisters regrouped calmly, as though this were nothing new. Anika wiped blood from her knuckles and turned to him. Your land is not safe. We stay here now. Weston's head swam. He had prayed for a wife, but instead destiny had delivered 3 warriors who had just saved his life. Part of him wanted to protest, to reclaim control over his home, but another part whispered that without them, he'd already be dead. Still shaking, he croaked, Why here? Why me? Anika's gaze held his, steady and unflinching. Because fate brought us. And fate doesn't make mistakes. The words burrowed into him deeper than he cared to admit. That night, as the stars spread across the sky, Weston sat by the fire watching the sisters with a mix of awe and confusion. Tala sharpened arrows, her movements fluid, almost graceful. Maren cleaned her rifle in silence, her sharp eyes never fully resting. Anika, seated nearest the flames, looked like a chieftain carved from stone. Weston's hands trembled as he held his tin cup of coffee. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain, his quiet life had ended the moment that Wagon arrived. And though fear coiled tight in his chest, a strange spark of anticipation burned there too, whispering that perhaps this twist of fate carried more than just danger. Perhaps it carried a chance to be remade. Just as he began to gather courage to ask them who they really were, a low howl echoed across the plain, eerie and long. Coyotes, maybe, but the way the sisters instantly stiffened made his skin crawl. Anika rose, scanning the darkness. That is not coyote. Weston's pulse quickened. Then what? Tala's voice was hushed but grim. Hunters. Not for animals. For us. And with that chilling revelation, the night around them seemed to close in, heavy with secrets Weston was not ready to face. The howl faded into the night, but its echo seemed to cling to Weston's bones like ice. He looked toward the sisters, hoping one of them might laugh and say it was nothing. But their faces were carved in stone, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. Anika's jaw tightened as she whispered, They've found us. Weston swallowed hard. Who? Maren slid her rifle onto her lap. Men who don't forgive debts. Men who track blood like wolves. Weston felt his chest tighten. He had expected bandits earlier in the day, but this was something different. Whoever hunted them wasn't after money or land. They were after the sisters themselves. The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Anika suddenly turned toward him, her eyes glinting in the firelight. You wanted a bride. What you got is 3 women carrying enemies across half the frontier. Do you still want us here? Weston's throat went dry. The logical part of him screamed to send them away, to cut ties before their trouble swallowed him whole. But another voice deep inside whispered that he couldn't, not after today, not after they'd saved him. And not after the strange spark that burned in his chest whenever Anika's gaze locked on his. He shook his head slowly. This land's all I got. If you're staying, we'll fight together. For the first time, the faintest curve touched Anika's lips, though it wasn't quite a smile. More like approval. The night passed without further sound, but Weston barely slept. At dawn, he found Tala crouched near the corral, her fingers pressed into the dirt. Tracks, she murmured, pointing to faint imprints. 6, maybe 7 men. Clothes. His blood turned to ice. They're watching us? Tala nodded grimly. They will wait until dark. That's when hunters strike. Weston clenched his fists. He'd dreamed of a woman who would make him forget his loneliness. Instead he'd been handed a war he didn't understand. Yet when he looked at Tala's steady eyes, he realized something strange. He wasn't afraid the way he used to be. Not entirely. There was a new fire in him, and it was because of them. By midday, the sisters prepared for battle as though it was routine. Tala strung arrows, Maren checked her bullets, and Anika reinforced the old wooden fence around the house as if it were a fort. Weston tried to help, but his hands shook with inexperience. Finally, Anika stopped him, her massive hand gripping his wrist firmly. Fear makes you sloppy. You must decide, are you prey or hunter? Weston wanted to answer boldly, but doubt gnawed at him. Still, he forced out the words. Hunter. Anika's eyes bored into him, testing, and finally she released him. Then act like it. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the first real test arrived. A lone rider appeared on the ridge, silhouetted by the dying light. He didn't move, didn't call out, just sat on his horse watching. Weston's heart thundered. What do we do? Maren lifted her rifle. Anika shook her head. Not yet. They want to scare us first. Break us down. Hours crawled by. The rider vanished into the darkness, but the silence that followed was worse. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like whispered threats. Weston clutched his shotgun, sweat slick on his palms. Then it came. The first shot shattered the night, splintering the porch post inches from his head. Weston dropped low, ears ringing, while Maren returned fire with deadly calm. Shadows moved at the edge of the yard, 4 figures rushing low. Tala's arrows hissed, 2 men crumpling silently into the dirt. Anika leapt from the porch like a mountain come to life, meeting another head-on. Weston watched in stunned disbelief as she caught the man's wrist mid-swing, twisted, and dropped him screaming into the dust. But another slipped past, heading straight for the house. Weston's gut clenched. For the first time, the fight was his alone. He raised his shotgun, but his hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped it. The figure lunged into the doorway, knife flashing. Weston fired blind. The blast lit the room, deafening him, and the intruder collapsed at his feet. Smoke stung his eyes. His chest heaved as he realized, he had killed a man. His knees nearly gave out, but Anika's voice thundered from outside, Boyd. Hold strong. Somehow, those words steadied him. The fight dragged on, fierce and brutal. But when the smoke cleared, the ground around his ranch was littered with bodies. The survivors fled into the night, their hunt broken. Silence returned, heavy and final. Weston stumbled outside, his ears still ringing. The sisters stood among the fallen, blood and dust streaking their skin, their eyes unbroken. Anika looked at him with something new in her gaze, respect. You did not run. Weston swallowed hard, forcing down the bile in his throat. Neither did you. For the first time, she gave a short, sharp nod. But just when Weston thought it was over, Tala crouched near one of the fallen men, pulling something from his pocket. A sealed letter, marked with a strange black emblem, an arrow crossed with a serpent. She paled as she read. They were not here for us alone. They were sent for him. She lifted her gaze to Weston. His heart stopped. What do you mean me? Maren's voice was low, steady. This is a bounty. On your head. Weston staggered back, the world spinning. A bounty? He had never broken the law, never crossed anyone powerful. Yet here it was, proof in black ink. Someone wanted him dead. And worse. Someone powerful enough to hire hunters like these. He shook his head wildly. That can't be true. I'm no outlaw. I'm nobody. Anika stepped closer, her towering frame casting him in shadow. Fate brought us here for a reason. Maybe it was never about us. Maybe it was always about you. Weston felt the ground slip beneath him. He had prayed for a bride, and instead found himself in the middle of a war with enemies he didn't even understand. The sisters watched him silently, waiting for his choice. Run, or stand. Weston's fists tightened. He thought of his failing ranch, the loneliness that had hollowed him for years, and the fire he'd seen in their eyes as they fought. Slowly, he raised his chin. Then we fight together. Until I know who wants me dead, and why." The sisters exchanged a look, wordless agreement passing between them. Anika placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, her voice low but certain. "Then you are one of us now." Weston didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. He had allies. Strange, fierce, and dangerous allies. And somewhere in the shadows, a greater enemy waited. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it set his blood burning with a purpose he had never known. As the first light of dawn touched the plains, Weston Boyd realized his life had ended the day the wagon arrived. But what replaced it was something far bigger. A story just beginning. And one written in fire, blood, and the wild beating heart of the untamed West.